It's strange how grief changes the way you see things. After my wife, Sarah, passed away, I couldn't stay in the city anymore. Too many reminders, corners and cafes haunted by memories I wasn't ready to face. People kept telling me Ellie was young enough to adapt, that kids are resilient, but I could see it in her eyes. She didn't fully understand why Mommy wasn't coming home. Neither did I. So, we moved back to Alders Creek, the small town I'd grown up in, to live in the house my parents had left me before they passed. It was a quiet place, nestled on the edge of sprawling woods that stretched for miles. Sarah was never one for the countryside. That was part of the reason we never lived here ourselves, even though we had a house. Yet to me, it felt familiar, comforting in a distant, numb sort of way. I convinced myself the silence was what we needed, or at least room to pretend that everything wasn't falling apart. I hadn't been back here in nearly 20 years, but some things never change. Alders Creek was exactly as I remembered it. One main road, a diner, a grocery store, and clusters of houses scattered along the edge of the thick woodland. The townsfolk were kind, if a bit distant. They remembered me vaguely, the kid who left for college and never really looked back. They offered condolences about Sarah with sympathetic eyes and awkward smiles. I tried to keep conversations short. It was easier that way. Our new home was old, wooden, and filled with creaks and groans. But it was warm. Ellie ran through it the first day, exploring rooms and opening cabinets like it was some grand adventure. Seeing her excitement stirred something in me, a fragile kind of hope. Yet beneath that hope was persistent ache, a nagging emptiness that no amount of distance or quiet seemed to fill. By the end of the first week, Ellie started talking to herself. I brushed it off as normal kid stuff, a way of coping, creating a companion out of thin air when loneliness sets in. I had imaginary friends at her age too. But when I asked her who she was chatting with, she answered quickly. "Mr. Mapmaker," she told me, her voice cheerful yet serious. "He's nice, Daddy, really smart, but he's very particular about getting things right." I just smiled and nodded, glad she had found something to keep her mind busy. I had no idea how quickly Mr. Mapmaker would become so much more than just a comforting illusion. Over the next few weeks, Ellie didn't stop drawing. If anything, the maps became her obsession. Every evening, after dinner, she'd sit cross-legged at the coffee table, crayons spread out meticulously before her. I'd watch silently from the couch, pretending to read. But really, I was waiting, wondering what she'd sketch next. She'd hum softly to herself, lost in concentration, talking quietly as if someone were right beside her. "No, that's wrong," she'd mumble. "Mr. Mapmaker says the lake is deeper. Here." Most of the maps were innocent, even sweet. She'd draw the layout of her new house or a rough sketch of her school. But they started changing. She began illustrating places I recognized from childhood, ones I hadn't visited since I was her age, places I hadn't thought about in decades. An abandoned hunting cabin at the edge of the woods, weathered and crumbling, its roof sagging. She drew it exactly how I remembered it, right down to the broken shutters and faded red paint peeling from the walls. The thing is, Ellie's maps were unmistakably the work of a child. Crude lines, uneven proportions, colours bleeding past the edges. Trees were spindly things, their trunks a scribbled mess of brown, and lakes were heavy smudges of blue wax, pressed so hard into the paper that it sometimes tore. She'd label things in big, looping letters. Cabin, scrawled messily beneath a red blob of crayon. Big tree, next to a shaky green blob. Then came the lake. A stagnant, moss-covered pond deep in the woods, so silent and still that kids in Alders Creek used to dare each other to toss rocks into it, convinced that disturbing the water would wake something beneath. Ellie drew it with eerie accuracy, the surface shaded darkly, her crayon pressing hard enough to tear the paper in places. The edges of the map were smudged with her fingerprints, as though she traced the points countless times before finally getting it perfect. It wasn't just unsettling because of the details. It was unsettling because Ellie had no way of knowing about these places. I hadn't spoken a single word about them since we moved here, hadn't even thought of them in decades. And yet, there they were, rendered clearly by my 6-year-old daughter. One evening, while Ellie worked silently, I noticed something else about the drawings. Hidden among the trees and buildings were tiny symbols, strange markings that resembled letters. When I asked Ellie what they meant, she only shrugged, not looking up from her work. "Mr. Mapmaker says they're important," she replied softly, her eyes fixed on the paper. "He says they help you find your way back." The implication unsettled me. "Back to where, Ellie?" I asked cautiously. She paused, still gripping the crayon tightly. She didn't look at me, but her voice lowered to a whisper. "Back home, Daddy." A shiver crawled down my spine, sudden and cold. Our home was right here, in this creaky old house with its peeling paint and overgrown yard. But the certainty in Ellie's voice made my stomach twist. For the first time, I wondered if home meant something else entirely to her. I gently took the drawing from her hands. "Ellie, sweetheart, why don't you draw something happier tonight? Maybe some flowers or your friends at school." She looked away for a second, then back at me, confused, as if I'd said something ridiculous. "Mr. Mapmaker doesn't like those things," she replied softly, almost apologetically, as if explaining the obvious. "He says we have to finish this one first." She turned back to her drawing, the tip of her crayon grinding into the paper again, the silence thick and heavy around us. And I watched the tiny hands move, as though guided. I focused on her movements, almost in a daze. I'd been staring so long that she had actually finished the map right in front of me. A crude crayon line leading through the woods to an old hunting cabin. Then she started writing letters above the cabin. And that's when I snapped out of it and cursed myself under my breath for bothering her for just drawing. The morning I decided to follow Ellie's map started shortly after. I remember standing in the kitchen, staring down at the worn, folded paper on the counter Ellie had just finished the day prior. The hunting cabin, the spot she labelled in neat, childish handwriting. where Mommy lives now." I laughed when I first read it, but that laughter had quickly faded, leaving behind an ache in my chest that hadn't dulled since losing Sarah. Ellie had seemed so serious when she handed it to me the night before. She looked up at me, eyes earnest, hopeful even. "Mr. Mapmaker said you need to see it, Daddy. He says it's important." And now, standing alone, coffee grown cold in my mug, I felt something settle in my gut. The rational part of me, the responsible adult, the grieving husband who'd buried Sarah, wanted to throw the map away and scold my child for this. Maybe she'd overheard neighbors talking. Maybe she'd seen a picture somewhere in my parents' photo albums. But something darker, quieter, tugged at me. A whisper that had been growing louder ever since Ellie handed me the map. What if it's real? Of course, I had no reason to believe so. But anyone who had ever lost anyone as suddenly as I did would know that you would hold onto any inkling of hope like a lifeline, no matter how otherworldly it seemed to other people. I dropped Ellie at her aunt's house, barely registering the small talk exchanged in the doorway. My mind was already deep in those woods, following those strange, childish directions. I had to be losing it. Ellie was just imaginative, copying details she'd overheard, piecing together half-remembered fragments of conversations she wasn't meant to hear. It had to be. It took me nearly an hour of trudging through mud and bramble before the cabin appeared, exactly as she'd drawn it. An old structure, sagging and consumed by moss, half hidden by twisted, skeletal trees. The air was thick, heavy with a smell of mold and earth. I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. Shadows swallowed me, broken only by slivers of daylight filtering through cracked walls. I could barely breathe, not from the air, but from the weight of memory. Childhood fears long dismissed, stories whispered between classmates of dark figures and missing people. I almost turned back then, until I saw something glinting on the floor, catching the sparse, dirty sunlight. I crouched, breath hitching painfully in my chest as my fingers curled around it. A silver bracelet, small and delicate, decorated with tiny emeralds. Her bracelet. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped it. It couldn't be here. I'd chosen it myself for a birthday, buried with her when I'd said my last goodbye. It couldn't be here. But it was. I stumbled out of the cabin, the bracelet clenched tight in my fist, heart thundering in my ears. When I finally reached the car, I sat there shaking for what felt like hours, staring down at the silver chain coiled in my palm, her memory wrapped tightly around me. By the time I made it back home, Ellie was in bed, but I couldn't wait. I knelt beside her, my voice breaking as I held up the bracelet. "Ellie, sweetheart, how did you know about this?" She opened her eyes slowly, sleepily, like she'd been expecting me. "Mr. Mapmaker told me," she said, yawning softly. "He knows a lot of things." "Did he tell you where he found it?" I whispered, afraid of her answer, yet desperate for it. Her eyes drifted closed, her voice fading into a sleepy whisper. "Mr. Mapmaker says Mommy gave it to him. He said it means you're on the right path. I sat there beside her bed, bracelet clenched tightly, heart hammering painfully in my chest. The right path. I didn't even know where I was going, but something told me it was already too late to turn back. After the bracelet incident, I couldn't pretend it was all coincidence anymore. Something was wrong, something bigger than Ellie, bigger than me. I needed answers, but finding them was harder than I expected. I went to see Mr. Gentry, the owner of the local hardware store. I stopped in under the pretense of needing gardening supplies, lingering until we were alone. As casually as I could, I mentioned the woods behind my property. The friendly smile he'd worn when I walked in vanished instantly, replaced with a careful blankness. His hands pausing over a row of rusty gardening shears. "What about 'em?" he asked, voice cautious, as if I just touched on something off limits. "Just curious. My daughter, she's been exploring around here lately. Says she's found some interesting places." His eyes flickered away, voice strained. "Kids have good imaginations." "It's more than that," I pressed. "She drew maps, detailed maps." He set down the shears heavily, still not meeting my gaze. "You keep her close. That's not a place kids should be wandering." He hesitated, his voice quieter, burdened. "And you shouldn't be poking around either." Before I could ask why, another customer entered, and the conversation ended abruptly. I kept trying, approaching others. The old woman at the grocery, Mr. Cooper down at the diner. But every time I mentioned the woods, I hit a wall of discomfort. Polite smiles would tighten, friendly chatter turning stiff and strained, and conversation quickly ended. No matter who I asked, I got the same warning disguised as advice. Stay out of the woods. The worst was Mrs. Callahan, who lived at the end of my street. She was ancient, even when I was a kid, and time hadn't made her any less sharp or perceptive. The afternoon sun was waning when I found her tending her rose garden, hands shaking slightly as she pruned dead leaves. "Mrs. Callahan," I called out, trying to sound casual, friendly. She paused, eyes narrowing behind her thick lenses, scrutinizing me closely. I swallowed, pushing through my discomfort. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded slowly, eyes sharp. "Ask, Benjamin." "The woods, the ones behind..." Her eyes narrowed, cutting me off before I could finish. Her voice was stern and quiet, carrying a deep warning. "Some questions are better left unanswered." "Please," I whispered, desperation leaking through my careful composure. "My daughter's drawn maps, things she couldn't know. Something's wrong. Something is..." "Not something, Benjamin. Someone." She took a careful step toward me, lowering her voice further. "There's always something in those woods, always has been, long before you and long after. It'll still be there. It finds ways of speaking, but the real danger, the real horror, is what it promises." She turned away sharply, pulling the door shut behind her, ending our conversation with a heavy finality. The silence left in a wake pressed in on me, deeper than before, as though the air itself had gone still. That night, I locked every window, bolted the back door, and double-checked every latch and lock in the house. I sat awake in the dark for hours, listening carefully, heart pounding at every rustle of wind and every distant snap of a branch. Ellie slept peacefully down the hall, unaware of the darkness that had taken root around us. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just the woods I had to worry about. Whatever I'd uncovered in my quest for answers was woven deeply into the heart of this town, an unspoken terror they'd grown up learning to ignore. The woods weren't just forbidden, they were feared. From then on, Ellie wasn't allowed outside without me. The forest loomed at the edge of our property like a silent predator, patient and hungry. No matter how hard I watched Ellie, though, the dread remained, creeping slowly into my chest like rot in old wood. It wasn't enough. Whatever had gripped Ellie was not letting go, despite her no longer going outside. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. Whatever was reaching out to Ellie, whatever was calling itself Mr. Mapmaker, had embedded itself too deeply. I had to get her out, had to get us away from that cursed forest before it swallowed us whole. Ellie fought the idea immediately, so unlike her usual gentle demeanour that it took me by surprise. She kicked and screamed as I carried her to the car, crying out that Mr. Mapmaker wouldn't let us leave, that we couldn't just abandon Mommy. Her words clawed at me, but I gritted my teeth, determined. It was time to put distance between Ellie and whatever darkness had been whispering in her ear. That night, as I packed our bags in tense silence, Ellie finally stopped pleading. She sat quietly in the corner of her room, drawing furiously, her tiny hand gripping the crayon with unsettling force. I didn't dare interrupt her, afraid I'd trigger another meltdown. At least she was calm. At least she was safe. Or so I thought. Some time after midnight, I woke abruptly, my heart hammering in the silence. Something immediately felt wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was, so I looked around. The hallway looked just the same as it always had, but it took a moment longer to realize what was wrong. Ellie's bedroom door, usually kept cracked open, was wide open, and the hallway beyond utterly still. I moved quietly, trying to remain calm as I stepped into her empty room, stomach tightening painfully when I saw the note resting on a pillow. It was another map, far more precise than the others, drawn hastily in the dark strokes of charcoal. The label read simply, "Mommy is waiting." My breath caught, heart lurching with fear. My daughter was gone. I sprinted out the front door into the suffocating blackness of the forest, screaming Ellie's name until my throat burned. Twigs and branches tore at my skin, cutting my face and arms as I crashed blindly through the darkness. Nothing made sense anymore. Trees twisted grotesquely around me, paths doubled back impossibly, landmarks shifted into alien shapes exactly like the twisted images Ellie had drawn. Every step felt wrong, unnatural, as if the forest itself was reshaping around me, leading me deeper, guiding me into its heart. Then, finally, the trees opened into a clearing I'd never seen before. Moonlight bathed the clearing in pale, ghostly white, but there were no shadows, only stark emptiness, like the light itself feared to touch whatever stood in the center. Ellie was there, perfectly still. Her face was serene, empty of emotion, eyes staring blankly ahead. And beside her, standing what must have been at least 10 feet tall, its form shifting like smoke and ink, was who I assumed to be Mr. Mapmaker. The being Ellie had innocently named and trusted, the monster who twisted her grief into something dark and dangerous. My fists clenched, rage and helplessness swelling in my chest. "Let her go," I demanded, my voice shaking. "Please, she's just a little girl." Ellie turned her head slowly, mechanically, and smiled a hollow, distant smile. "Mummy says we can all be together again," she whispered. Her voice was soft, gentle, but utterly devoid of humanity. It was a mouth speaking, but the words belonged to someone or something else. The figure beside her shifted, its shape rippling and unstable, as if fighting to maintain its form. When it spoke, its voice crawled from every direction, seeping from the earth, the trees, the very sky itself. It vibrated through my bones, settling deep into my marrow. "You've come far," it murmured, the sound a twisted mockery of human comfort. "You deserve a reward." "I don't want a reward," I spat back. "Just give me my daughter." "You misunderstand," the mapmaker said gently, almost sorrowfully. "Everything has a price. To leave with her, you must leave something behind." My breath caught in my throat, heart thundering in my chest. I understood immediately. It wasn't asking for something trivial, not a keepsake or a memory. It wanted something deeper, something fundamental, a trade, an exchange. I didn't stop to think. I couldn't afford to. Instinct seized me, overpowering every hesitation, every shred of fear. I lunged forward, wrapped my arms around Ellie, and yanked her away from the towering silhouette of Mr. Mapmaker. The shadowy figure unleashed an enraged, whispering hiss, 1,000 voices slithering into my ears, sharp and venomous. But I didn't listen. I turned, Ellie tight in my grasp, and I ran. Trees twisted inward, clawing branches tore at our clothes and skin, and the very earth beneath our feet buckled, as though desperate to hold us there, to trap us forever. The air filled with screams, raw, tortured voices that ripped through my skull, begging, pleading, commanding us to stop. Ellie's small body went limp in my arms, her head bouncing weakly against my shoulder with every frantic step. Terror rose like bile in my throat, nearly choking me. But I couldn't slow down, couldn't falter, not even for a second. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed in agony, but I kept pushing forward, stumbling blindly through the endless maze of woods, desperately seeking some semblance of familiarity. I could feel the mapmaker behind us, a presence of icy, endless hunger closing the distance, furious of being robbed of its prize. It whispered harshly, angrily, promising suffering, promising that we would never escape. But I refused to let its poison seep into my heart. With a final burst of strength, I barreled through a wall of dense branches. Pain exploded across my face and arms, but suddenly, blessedly, I broke free. I stumbled forward onto familiar ground, tripping over the garden stones at the edge of our backyard. We collapsed together into the damp grass, blooded, bruised, but alive. The oppressive silence was almost unbearable. The woods behind us were quiet now, as if they'd given up their pursuit, at least for the moment. For several heartbeats, I lay there, chest heaving, gasping for air, just holding Ellie, savouring the fragile illusion of safety. Then I realised Ellie wasn't moving. My stomach twisted violently as I rolled her over, gently brushing her tangled hair away from her face. Her eyes were closed, her skin pale and cold. I shook her gently at first, then with growing panic, desperation tightening my voice. Ellie? Ellie, wake up. Baby, please, wake up. I felt sick. Every horrible possibility crashing through my mind at once. Tears blurred my vision, heart hammering painfully in my chest. Then mercifully, her eyes fluttered open, staring blankly toward the night sky. Relief flooded me, powerful enough to make me dizzy. But the feeling was short-lived. Ellie's gaze wandered aimlessly, unfocused, confused. When she finally turned to me, her eyes were empty, like she was seeing me for the very first time. Who? She whispered weakly, voice trembling and uncertain. Who are you? My blood turned to ice. Ellie, it's Daddy, I stammered, trying desperately to keep my voice calm, gentle. It's me, sweetheart. You're safe now. She pulled back slightly, her eyes flickering fearfully, clearly frightened. No memory of the bond we'd shared since the moment she'd been born. My daughter, the reason for every struggle, every pain I endured, looked at me. I clutched her tightly, my shoulders shaking silently, unable to even cry. The house felt painfully empty as the terrible realization sunk in. I'd saved Ellie's life, but somehow I'd still lost her. The weeks passed. Ellie healed physically, cuts faded, bruises yellowed and vanished. But something fundamental inside her never came back. Each morning, I woke to a house that was both painfully familiar and unbearably foreign. Ellie moved through the same routines, ate breakfast in the same chair, slept in the same bed. But the little girl who had once filled these rooms with laughter and curiosity was no longer there. The doctors had an easy answer, neatly packaged as severe dissociative trauma. Losing a parent was a blow that could fracture any child's world, they said. But they hadn't been there. They hadn't watched the shadow-formed monstrosity whisper impossible things. They hadn't felt reality itself bend around them. Ellie's memories weren't buried under layers of grief. They'd been torn away, ripped from her as payment to something older and far crueler than mere loss. We lived in strained silence. Ellie no longer mentioned Mr. Mapmaker, and she stopped drawing maps altogether, as if that obsession had never existed. But she also stopped calling me Dad. My name felt strange on her lips, polite, distant, like she was addressing someone else's father. like I was no longer part of her story. I tried to bridge the gap. Little gestures, reminders, favourite meals, and bedtime stories we'd read 100 times. But her response was always the same. A polite, confused smile, as if humorously tolerating the well-meaning stranger who kept trying too hard. The house was quieter than ever before, the silence heavy enough to suffocate. But it was preferable to the alternative, the whispers that lingered at the edge of my dreams, voices echoing softly through the hallways, mocking my choice, reminding me of what I'd sacrificed. Whatever I'd done that night, whatever I'd given away, was the cost. Ellie was here, safe, physically unharmed, but I had not brought my daughter home. I had simply traded one horror for another, a monkey paw's wish. So, every night when I'm alone, I sit in my office and draw maps. I started with random doodles with no real inspiration. But slowly, they're becoming more and more cohesive. I scribble things without thinking, yet they seem to make some kind of sense. I have not seen Mr. Mapmaker, yet sometimes I feel him guiding my hand in strange ways. Soon, I'll have a guide to follow, to lead me back to the spot in the forest where Mr. Mapmaker makes his trades. I'm going to get Ellie back. I just don't know what it will truly cost. It was during one of our fights, after the screaming had turned into an uncomfortable silence, that Kira had suggested it. "Maybe we just need to get out of here, start somewhere new," she said with a trembling voice, staring at the wall. I honestly did not think it would solve anything. Would a change of scenery really be our saving grace? But as I looked into her eyes, we were desperate. I realized that when you reach your boiling point, any solution seems better than a lack thereof. We had been grasping at straws for months. Between the arguments, sleepless nights, and the growing depression between me and my wife, Kira, it felt like our little family was getting unraveled day by day. We were suffocating. Kira and I met in high school, and our once fiery romance was now reduced to ice-cold embers. The sort of love that had simply grown too familiar, too accustomed and too routine, soiled by years of exhaustion, stress, and the demands of raising Lily. Our fights had become unbearable. Insignificant things like dishes left in the sink or unwashed clothes would explode into massive shouting matches, and neither of us could stop. Kira's eyes were now hollow, and her laugh, which used to make me feel like I was on top of the world, had become all too rare. We were losing ourselves entirely, and our sweet little girl was caught in the crossfire. She had become quieter. She clung to her toys, her eyes masked with sadness, watching us from the corner of the room as if she understood far more than we ever gave her credit for. The drive to the town was quiet, but I could tell we all had hope for our future. It felt like we were shedding our skin, leaving behind layers of hate and resentment, the ghosts of our past, 1 mile at a time. We did not speak much during the trip at all. The hum of the tires against the road filled the vehicle interior, accompanied by the low murmur of the radio and Lily's humming from the back seat. Around late afternoon, we left trading the city skyline for wide roads and endless fields stretching on forever. The sun was setting as we neared our to-be hometown. The air outside the car grew cooler, fresher in a way. I cracked the window, breathing in my surroundings, feeling the weight of the past few years lift, if just slightly, off my chest. Kira seemed a little lighter too. She glanced out the window, a small, hopeful smile playing on her face. Lily had fallen asleep at this point, her little hands clutching a stuffed rabbit tightly. I let myself believe, if only for a moment, that this move might actually work, that we could escape. The road led us down a winding path flanked by towering pines. The canopy grew thicker, blocking out the little sunlight that was left. I glanced at Kira, who was staring straight ahead with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She caught my eye and offered a reassuring smile. Finally, we pulled into the driveway of our new home. The house was small, a cozy old build that stood in line with the many other houses like it. It was adorned with a neat yard and a white picket fence that framed it like a postcard. I felt a flicker of hope once more. Moving in was a sort of blur of activity. Boxes stacked and nestled in every single corner, inside and out. Lily ran around the house with joy as she explored her new room. Kira and I worked in tandem, and I realized this was the first time we had truly done something together in a long time. It started to reignite the reason we married each other all those years ago. We almost finished unpacking when we met her. I was unloading the very last of the boxes from the car when I noticed her standing at the end of the driveway, watching us. An older lady dressed in a sweater and long skirt with silver hair tied into a bun. She had a thin, angular face, her age showing with each crease and fold of her skin. But her eyes were sharp, too sharp for someone her age. There was something just a tad too vibrant about her, as if she was much younger than she looked. "Hello there," she called in a sing-song tone. She waved as she walked up to my family and me, a plate of cookies in her hand. Kira and I smiled and waved back, nervous but excited to meet some of the locals. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she chirped, offering the cookies she had in hand. "I'm Margaret. It's so lovely to see a young family move in." "Thank you," Kira replied, grabbing a cookie off the plate. I forced a polite smile as Margaret's gaze drifted behind me to Lily, who had just wandered out of the house, her stuffed rabbit in hand. Margaret's smile seemed to widen, her eyes lingering on Lily. It looked like she was sizing her up. "You have a beautiful daughter," Margaret said, her voice soft. I cleared my throat and straightened my posture. "Yeah, that's Lily. She's the light of our lives." Margaret's eyes flicked up to mine, her smile steady. "I'm sure she is, and she's so full of life," she said, as Lily excitedly darted in and out of the house. As we exchanged basic pleasantries, I noticed a small girl standing behind Margaret, whom I had not noticed before. She looked to be around Lily's age, but there was something off about her. She stood perfectly still. Her face was pale and her eyes dark, lacking any expression or life. Margaret's voice pulled me back to reality. "If someone hasn't told you already, there's a wishing well that is a town's tradition to use. You should take Lily there. I'm sure she'll love it." "The wishing well?" I said, more to fill the silence than out of genuine curiosity. Yes. Margaret's tone shifted slightly. It brings good fortune to those who offer a wish and toss a coin. The well has been part of this town for generations. I'm sure you will want to give it a try. Many have. I paused and then nodded, unsure of how to respond. I was on the far side of superstition, never putting much stock into that thinking, and my wife was the same. But how her eyes gleamed when she spoke about the well made it look like she was dead serious about it. There was something strange about her enthusiasm, almost like she was too eager. She waved goodbye and walked back toward her house, with a small girl slowly shambling like a zombie behind her. As soon as she was out of sight, I turned to Kira. That was really odd. Kira shrugged. She's probably just one of those overly friendly neighbors. Besides, it's a small town. Of course they're gonna have their traditions. That was a fair reasoning. But something about the woman put me on edge. I tried to brush it off as the usual unease I get when I meet new people. Over the coming days, the town felt like a breath of fresh air. The change in the atmosphere did wonders for our little family. Despite my doubts, the tension between us eased, and Lily seemed to thrive in the open space and yard. The town was quiet and quaint, with charming little shops adorning every corner, and the locals were friendly. It was the perfect place for us to restart. But something stayed on my mind. The well. It kept coming up in conversation in places where it shouldn't have. In the grocery store, a cashier mentioned it in passing. The well changed my life, she said with a smile that stretched her face. At work, my new co-workers casually talked about how the well had fixed their relationships and increased their pay like it was normal. Everyone was talking about something relating to the well everywhere I went and turned. The same eerie tone was in their voices, and the exact same too happy expressions. Everyone had some sort of story, how they'd wished for a marriage proposal, good health, a new job, and their wishes apparently came true. It was always talked about with a strange mixture of playfulness and a sense of caution, as if it was something much more serious, but also a joke. One evening, as Kira and I sat in the living room, I finally mentioned it to her. Have you noticed how people keep talking about that well? She laughed, but it was a nervous laughter. Yeah, it's a little weird, isn't it? Everyone seems so obsessed with it. I agreed. It's like they're all selling the same story. Kira's smile faded. Maybe we should just ignore it. Let's not question it in case it insults them. It seems to mean a lot here. And for a while, we did. It began with the small things. Despite my efforts, my hours at work were cut down, and my co-workers became colder and more distant. The town, which had felt so welcoming when we first arrived, seemed darker and gloomier. The sky constantly seemed overcast, and the air felt heavy. The roads became littered with trash, not overwhelmingly, but noticeably so. It felt like some unseen force was pressing its weight down on us. Kira's mood shifted too. The happiness we'd found after moving seemed to slip away from us. She became quieter and more withdrawn. The fight started again, sharper and crueler than before. Was the excitement of moving here the only thing that placated us? I was frustrated at our situation, that we were unraveling again, and I didn't know any way to get my frustrations out. That night, after a particularly brutal argument, I found myself walking through the town and forest, the cold air biting at my skin. I just wanted to clear my head away from the situation. Usually, I walked until my head cooled and then headed back, but the argument was so heated that I just kept walking and walking. I hadn't meant to go this far out, but I ended up deep into a trail in the woods. This somehow led me to the well. Though the well was often mentioned, I had yet to actually know where it was. No signs marked its location, so it must have been known only to the locals. The old stone structure stood in the middle of a small clearing, surrounded by tall, twisted trees. The moonlight cast long shadows over the moss-covered stone, making it look like something out of a painting. My breathing slowed to a crawl. I did not know why I arrived at the well, but in desperation to get my life back on track, my mind returned to all the glowing testimonies I had heard about the well. I did not take this town's tradition seriously, but I was desperate and helpless. I needed to get my family out of the hole we were in. I approached the edge of the well and looked down into the abyss. The walls were smooth and slick with age, and a faint metallic and earthly scent rose up to meet me. There was no real movement, no wind or swaying of the trees, just an eerie silence of an impossibly empty forest. I felt like the trees were watching me, waiting to see what I would do next. Then, she appeared. Margaret. Her presence made me flinch. How had she gotten so close to me, so quietly, I wondered to myself. She stood about 10 feet away from me, her face bathed in moonlight and a smile even wider than before. There was something strange about her once more, something predatory. "You came," she said, her voice like the shuffling of dead leaves. I didn't mean to," I stuttered. My hands gripped the cold stone rim of the well. She moved closer to me, her eyes gleaming with something I wasn't able to place. Satisfaction, perhaps? "It's okay," she purred. "It's all right to feel lost. But this well, it can help. It's helped so many before, and will help many after you." I swallowed, noticing how dry my throat was getting. "I don't know if I believe that, Margaret." Margaret tilted her head like a curious animal, her smile unwavering. "Belief isn't necessary here, only the action you take." She paused briefly, and her eyes locked onto mine. "You've been struggling. I can see it in your eyes. The feeling that it's not enough, no matter what you do. This well can change that." Her words filled my mind like poison. I had tried everything. Kira and I had tried meditating and couples counseling, and now we have even moved across state and started fresh. And yet, our problems remain steady. I had nothing to lose. Margaret's eyes slid down toward my hand. "A coin," she whispered, "and a wish." I didn't even remember reaching into my pocket and pulling out a worn and dull quarter. My heart raced and my fingers trembled as I held it over the maw of the well. My back was turned to her, but I could feel Margaret's smile grow sharper. "Make your wish." I hesitated. I did not know what to wish for. Happiness, peace, for Kira and I to stop fighting. I did not know. I just wanted things to be okay. I wanted to have my family again, a semblance of control. I muttered the first thing that came to mind. I wish for everything to be better. The coin slipped from my fingers and tumbled into the darkness below. I never heard it hit the bottom. For a moment, nothing happened. The world stood still. I could feel Margaret watching me, waiting. And then she laughed, low and soft. "That's all it takes," she said, turning and walking away. I stayed momentarily, hoping to feel something divine wash over me, before realizing how childish this all was. So I headed back, following the trails I had walked to get there. I woke up drearily, tired from the previous night's long hike. I slowly made my way to the kitchen, fully prepared for a snide argument with Kira before seeing Lily off to school. She held back the shouting for when Lily was not around, but the passive-aggressive comments somehow hurt worse. When I got to the kitchen, my nose was hit by a heavenly smell. Pancakes. I don't know how, but Kira made pancakes that could put the best breakfast franchises out of business if she were ever to go pro. She smiled at the table, her plate waiting for me. I sat down, cautious but optimistic, and we did something we had not done in a long time. We laughed over breakfast, something we hadn't done since our first few days here. Lily was more animated, running around the yard with a wide grin on her face that made my heart swell. Things were somehow better. The improvements became undeniable. My job picked up again, my hours were restored, and I even got a sizable raise. Kira was happier and more engaged. The arguments stopped entirely, and they were replaced with quiet, peaceful evenings spent watching TV or reading something together. We were invited to neighborhood barbecues and town events. At these events and at my job, people congratulated me for finally making my wish. I thought it was weird how they knew, so I figured Margaret informed everyone. It took me a while to complete the town's tradition, but everybody was happy, and I was finally, officially, part of the town. It was late one evening when the first cracks began to show. I was in bed, half asleep, after an outing with some friends I'd made in the neighborhood, when Lily's scream shattered the silence. My heart nearly exploded out of my chest as I leapt out of bed, rushing to her room. Kira was right behind me. We burst through the door to find Lily in her bed, her eyes wide with pure terror, clutching her stuffed rabbit to her chest, shaking. "Mommy, Daddy, there's a monster outside my window," she cried, and pointed towards the window with a trembling finger. I ran over, throwing the curtains aside, but saw nothing, just the night sky and the faint outline of the trees beyond. I let out a sigh of relief and tried to calm her down. I told her it was just a bad dream, but the look in her eyes was all too real. She was terrified. "It's real, Daddy," she whispered. "I heard it talking to me." We tried to reassure her to the best of our abilities. She calmed down when we let her sleep in our bed with us so we could protect her from any monsters if they came back. This made her feel safe enough to fall back asleep and rest enough for school the day after. However, this was only a short-term solution for what became a long-term issue. The screams came again the next night, and the night after that. Each time, Lily was more petrified than the last, more insistent that something was just outside her window. Her childish demeanor faded, replaced by dark circles under her eyes and constant anxiety. She became quiet and withdrawn, and this affected us too. The sleepless nights caused my performance at work to worsen. Then, one night, she didn't scream. This would ordinarily be a sign of progress with the issue, but I still wanted to check up on her. I crept up to her room to avoid waking her if she was deep asleep. I was met with a cold draft of wind when I opened the door. The window was open. The curtains fluttered in the cold breeze and her bed was empty. I sprinted outside and shouted her name into the empty streets with no regard for the neighbors, who were probably all asleep. I received no answer apart from the echo of my own voice. The street stood still, and I felt my heart beating. Kira was in a state of complete disrepair, sobbing, screaming, unable to collect herself whatsoever. She was inconsolable. The only thing I could do was call the police. When they arrived, they were disturbingly calm. The senior officer, a burly man with greying hair, simply nodded along as I explained what had transpired. Still, his eyes showed no signs of urgency or concern. "She probably just ran off," he said with a shrug. "Happens all the time around here." I stared at him in disbelief. "What do you mean she ran off? She's 7 years old." He gave me a sort of placating smile. "Don't worry, she'll turn up. They always do." There was something horribly familiar about his tone. The same tone I had heard from the townspeople when they talked about the well. It made my skin crawl. A younger officer stood at the side of the senior officer, and he looked uncomfortable. His eyes filled with something like pity, and he avoided my gaze. I wanted to scream, shake them, to make them understand that my daughter was missing, but it felt like no matter what I did, they wouldn't take anything I said seriously. The senior officer said, "Call us if she doesn't come back in 48 hours. And they left. Kira collapsed into my arms. Her sobs racked her body. I did not know what to do. I felt powerless, as though everything was against us. The next 48 hours were hell. I scoured the town. I knocked on doors, asking anyone I could find if they had seen Lily. Every response was the same. Calm, detached. No one seemed to show even the slightest bit of concern. Some people even congratulated me, as if losing my daughter was something to be celebrated. It made no sense. Nothing did. While canvassing the streets, I would hear whispers. Conversations behind doors after I'd finished asking them for information about Lily. I tried to listen in, attempting to pick up any information they were withholding from me. I heard some familiar words I'd heard a lot in my time in this town. Tradition and well. I tried changing my tact from asking about Lily to asking about the well. I tried to be indirect, but it seemed word of Lily going missing was known across town. So every time I got close to understanding, someone would interrupt me with a smile and others with congratulations for making my wish, and never expanding beyond that. I was a complete wreck by the time the 48 hours were up. Kira shut down completely, refused to leave the house and barely spoke. I was spiraling. When the police returned, a different senior officer accompanied the younger one. I screamed and shouted at them that the 48 hours were up and that they had to look for my daughter now. The senior officer looked at me with a confused expression. "Why did you wait 48 hours to inform us?" "What?" I stammered. "You should have notified us as soon as she went missing. The likelihood of a missing child being found drastically decreases the longer it has been," he said with authority. I was stunned. There was so much I wanted to say back, but the thoughts swirled in my head so much that I couldn't pick a single train of thought to stick to. So I just stood there, mouth agape, emotions mixing within me rapidly. The younger officer then interrupted and asked his superior officer if he could take notes for the case. The senior officer nodded in agreement, looking disgusted as he left the room. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his eyes darting nervously. "This happens more often than you'd think." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He hesitated, glancing at his superior just standing behind him. "There's nothing we can do. The senior officer came back in and cut him off. It seemed he was listening from just outside the doorway and pulled him away before he could finish. "We have everything we need. We will do our best to find her," he grumbled before leaving. I tried to get his attention and ask him about what was truly happening, but they just left. I needed to find answers, and the only clue I had to go off was she. And the only person that came to mind about all of this was Margaret. That night, I went to knock on the one door I had been avoiding this entire time, but there was no answer. I wanted to take this as a sign that this wasn't the right line of thinking, but in my mind, I already knew where to find her. I followed the trails through the thick woods and arrived at the well. Margaret was waiting for me, her figure bathed in the dim glow of the moon once more. "You understand now, don't you?" she said, her voice almost gentle. "The well gives, but it also takes. You wished for a better life, and the well granted it. But there is always a price." I stared at her, my mind reeling. "What price? What are you talking about?" "Did you really think the price of everything you got would only be a quarter?" she asked, stepping closer. "And you made a pretty big wish." I panicked, shaking my head, trying to piece it all together. "You've already made your wish," Margaret said coldly. "But there is still time. You must choose, as we all have before. Your daughter or your wife. One will stay, one will go." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to scream, to run, that this was all superstitious nonsense, coincidence at its finest. But I couldn't deny that what was happening was real, and that this was my last piece of agency. "You have about 24 hours from now," Margaret said before walking away. "Make your choice." I wandered aimlessly back to the town. I was getting consumed by the reality of the impossible choice I had to make. I thought of Kira, broken and lost, and Lily, her innocent face twisted by fear. How could I choose? The next day went by in a blur, lost in thought about everything. But in the end, I made my decision. In the dead of night, I knocked on Margaret's door. My heart pounded in my chest, still unsure about all of this. She answered this time. Her eyes gleamed with a dark satisfaction. "Have you made your choice?" I swallowed hard, my throat constricting with emotion. "I choose my daughter." Margaret nodded, her expression unreadable. "It will be done," she murmured, and closed the door. It was so unceremonious, and yet my insides felt like I'd swallowed glass. That night, I lay beside Kira and looked at her, unable to sleep. She was completely unaware, oblivious to what was going to happen, to what I had done to her and our family. My heart was on the brink of tearing from guilt and sorrow, but there was no other way now. I drifted off to sleep, and she was gone in the early hours of the morning. I woke to an empty bed, the space beside me cold and undisturbed. There was no sign of a struggle or a fight, no trace of where she had been. I couldn't cry or scream. I was numb, hollowed by the weight of what I had done. I heard a frail voice calling to me from down the hallway. I rushed over to where I heard it, and when I opened Lily's door, there she was. She stirred from her sleep as if she had never disappeared, just as Margaret had promised. But she wasn't the same. She was a shell of the bright, happy girl she had once been, silent and withdrawn, her eyes dull and lifeless. She stared at me, but there was barely any recognition and no warmth, just an emptiness that mirrored my own. Days later, as I stumbled through town, I saw her, the little girl from Margaret's house. She was laughing, running down the street with a group of children. She wasn't the pale, lifeless figure I had seen before. The stark contrast from when I first saw her woke me from my stupor. She was full of life now, compared to the shambling zombie of a child when we first moved in. And I realized that Lily now resembled that shell. She had been drained before, just like Lily. The well had taken Lily's life, and now it had given it to her. This must have been Margaret's wish, and she had tricked me into paying the price. I stood there in the middle of the street as the cold reality finally washed over me. This was how the town worked. There was no bureau to complain to about this, no authority that operated the rules. I couldn't get one back on her. Margaret played the game, and I lost. But now, I was a part of it. As I neared my house, I noticed the for sale sign on a house a few doors down. If I wanted Lily to be back to how she was before, I had to play the game, just as Margaret did. Maybe it's time for another family to make a wish. I remember the first time I saw the man, the thing with a face like melting wax. I knew he had many masks and many names. He had followed our family for years, and from father to son, mother to daughter, the fear and terror of the faceless man got passed down. Every time he came, he would have a different face. The first time I saw him, he looked like a withered old Asian man, leaning heavily on a wooden cane with a silver top. Our front door stood wide open, and I saw my mother and father standing there, their faces as pale as ghosts as they looked down upon the stranger. I couldn't have been older than 11 years old, but the memory is still as sharp as a butcher's knife stuck in my brain. I walked forwards from the living room, the cartoon noises still blaring loudly in the background. The man looked past them and straight at me. He squinted his eyes and grinned. "Another lamb, so pretty and young," he mused. "Isn't it a shame when a child is taken so early in life, and yet God kills children every day? I heard last month a hurricane blew an entire school down and killed 100 of the little buggers in one swift go. So perhaps God will forgive me for my small sins, my taking of a few here and there to keep my appetite satiated." "Get out of here," my father snarled through gritted teeth. He clenched his fists until the knuckles turned white, looking as if he would strike out at any moment. "Do you know who I am?" the faceless man asked in a whispery voice. Then he began chuckling. It sounded like someone trying to laugh with a slit throat, a harsh, gurgling sound that raised goosebumps all up and down my body. My father slammed the door shut quickly, locking the deadbolts. I fingered the silver cross my mother had given me nervously. I always did when I was anxious. Feeling it laying there against my cold skin helped bring me back to the moment. My father turned to look at us with panic-stricken eyes. I heard light knocking on the door behind him as the demonic laughter continued to grow, until it became all I could hear. Then, without warning, it cut off. When I looked out the peephole on the front door, I saw the front stoop stood empty. "Get my gun," my father said to my mother. She left the room, quietly sobbing as she went. Sunlight from the warm summer sky continued to stream in through the windows. What a beautiful day, I thought to myself. Such a beautiful day. And maybe my last. Then I saw a shadow cross in front of the living room window. I saw someone peeking in with wide, excited eyes, a grin like a skull spread across his leathered old face. As I watched, the face began to drip and contort as it continued to smile. It started slowly around the lips and eyes, and then it began speeding up. Within seconds, I saw the flesh running down his cheeks and chin in rivulets, dripping like flesh-colored wax. Behind the mask he wore, I caught a glimpse of something horrible before new streams of flesh rolled over it from his scalp and forehead. Then the last of the human skin dripped off, and I found myself staring into the face of hell. I could never explain the true horror of the thing lurking behind its costume of human skin. It felt like staring into a pus-filled wound with maggots writhing around the edges, or maybe like falling into a mass grave. Some of its body seemed flipped inside out, with the glistening muscles on the outside, but the bloody, demonic face was far more disturbing. It had eyes like two smouldering cigarette burns. Its mouth was a slashed, disgusting thing. The lips looked eaten away, with ragged patches of flesh surrounding them that seemed to make the smile seem much larger, reminding me of how a clown would do his makeup. I saw that grinning mouth filled with countless needle-sharp teeth above black, sore-ridden gums that writhed and shivered in its lipless mouth. even through the window, a smell like sulfur and reeking, spoiled meat filtered into the house, seemed to fill the air like a physical presence. Its body looked flipped inside out. I could see the quivering muscles on the skinless figure. It looked deathly thin, and veins ran along the outside of its face and body like thick, dark worms, pulsating with each beat of the satanic heart that lay inside that thing's chest, emanating sickness and evil through every pore of its gleaming body. As it stared into my soul with its black, lidless eyes, I saw in that face all the worst nightmares of the universe. I saw mountains of corpses festering under a hot sun, black holes eating worlds as masses screamed. I saw mothers drowning their children in bathtubs and animals eating each other alive. I saw into eternity, and it looked so dark and empty that I fell to my knees, pleading. "Make it stop, make it stop," I cried, tears streaming down my face. My father ran in with his shotgun raised, but when I looked back up, the window was empty. Yet the visions continued to run through my mind like a movie, atrocity after atrocity, and somehow it all connected back to the faceless man. After a few seconds of utter silence, that deep, gurgling voice rang out, making us all jump. It seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, reverberating throughout the room. It said something that made my father waver on his feet. A strange verse, but one I remember by heart to this day. "Here is Belladonna, the lady of the rocks, the lady of situations. Here is the man with 3 staves, and here is the one-eyed merchant, and this card, which is blank, is something he carries on his back, which I am forbidden to see. I do not find the hanged man." After that, we barricaded the doors and locked all the windows. I knew it wouldn't keep the faceless man out. He could easily just smash through a window, and perhaps he wouldn't even need to do that. Maybe he could pass inside the house any time he wanted. And yet, if so, why hadn't he? "So, it started again," my mother said, looking at my father with a powerful intensity in her eyes. "He's come back again for a sacrifice." My father nodded slowly. "What do you mean, a sacrifice?" I asked, my child's mind not comprehending the magnitude of the situation yet. My father hesitated. "He eats the souls of people," my father said. "He and my great-grandfather drew up a contract a long, long time ago, and ever since, our family has had great wealth. You're young, so you don't really understand fully yet, but not everyone lives in mansions like us. Not everyone vacations in Paris and Buenos Aires during the summer vacation. Not everyone has a garage full of Porsches and Mercedes." "So why don't you just tell him no?" I asked in my childish way. "We don't need all this money." The left side of my father's face began to twitch. He stomped towards me, shouting as tears ran down his face. "I don't give a damn about the money," he cried. "The deal was drawn in blood and cursed from the first day. Do you think if I could get him to go away by giving him everything I own, I wouldn't? I would do it in a heartbeat. I would live in a goddamn trailer and eat instant noodles if I had to. But there's no escape." He looked around, as if expecting to see the faceless man standing right behind him. He began looking out the windows, seeing nothing but a bright summer's day. "We need to go," my mother whispered. "Now, let's take Susan and go. He won't find us if we keep moving." "He'll find us," my father said, looking defeated. Tears continued to stream down his face. He looked like a defeated man. He always does, but screw it, let's go. We'll take this asshole on and run around the world. We took off from the property, and my father told me more about the deal as we flew out of town in an expensive Mercedes, redlining the accelerator. I thought more than once he would crash and kill us all in his frenzy to put distance between us and the faceless man. Once every 50 years, my father said, he comes. He has his pick of the litter, as he calls it. He takes one child from our family, and in exchange, our wealth is guaranteed for the next 50 years. Even during the Great Depression, our family didn't suffer. Except, of course, the periodic abductions of children. He makes the parents watch as he takes the soul of the child into himself. I don't know what kind of foul magic it involves, but from what I've read in the diaries of my grandfather, it's a very painful ritual that involves skinning the child alive and rubbing their body with special herbs. Then he makes them walk, totally skinned and bleeding to death until they collapse, and that's when he takes the soul. He sucks it out of their eyes. It looks like thin wisps of light when it finally goes. I shook inwardly in horror. No one would ever allow that to happen to their kid, I said confidently. My father shook his head. You act as if we have a choice, he said. The first time he comes politely, knocks on the door and tells the parents it's time to fulfill the contract. If they say no, then he leaves. But he always comes back, and the next time, he won't be polite, and he won't leave. He'll come into the house when we're sleeping, torture me and your mother to death, slit our throats, and then take you away. He's tireless, he doesn't age, he doesn't sleep, and as far as I know, he can't die. How can we fight against such an evil? By going to the moon? But why would great-grandpa make a deal like that anyway? I asked. Because, at the time, he had 10 children, and all of them were starving. A few had dysentery, and he didn't have a penny to his name at the time. He chose to sacrifice one and give it to the faceless man to save the other 9. My father shrugged. I don't know if we can understand it. I certainly don't agree with it. I'm not sure he realized at the time that our family would suffer eternally afterwards, and that the contract could not be voided except through death. He laughed bitterly. We should have just let our family line die out, maybe. That would have solved the problem. What about those words at the end, Daddy? I asked. What did those mean? Oh, that's just a famous old poem. My grandfather used to recite it to me before he shot himself. He loved T.S. Eliot, and he thought the poem had some relevance to our problems for some reason. He never got over the loss of his son to the faceless man, you see. Never. He used to wake up screaming at night. He tried to drink his memories away. But in the end... My father braked suddenly, bringing the car to a full stop. I looked up, seeing forests on both sides of us. We hadn't travelled long. A hitchhiker stood at the edge of the road in grimy blue jeans and a bright tie-dye shirt. His long hair rippled around him as he stood with his thumb out. But his face had started to drip and melt. We all saw it and froze. My father reached down below his seat and pulled out the black shotgun. He ran out of the car like a madman, his eyes blazing with anger and terror. "Get out of here!" he cried, as if to a rabid animal, then raised the gun and fired. The faceless man's tie-dye shirt burst into shreds as buckshot tore into it. The faceless man smiled, raised his hand to us in a wave, and disappeared. The clothes fell limply to the grass below, now totally empty. My father shook his head grimly and turned around to come back to the car. A dark shape zoomed out of the forest, holding a sharp knife. Before my father could turn, he raised it to his throat and pulled. My mother screamed, getting out of the car to go help my father. But he was dead. Even as a child, I knew it. I could see the knife had practically severed his head from his body, except for the spine and a thin bit of flesh on the back. Blood poured out, flooding down his chest as he stood there for a moment, uncomprehending. Then he began to fall forwards, and his head snapped back, revealing the gore, muscle and ligaments beneath. I watched as my mother ran to his side, panic-stricken. The faceless man looked on with glee, laughing and shrieking. His black eyes blazed with an inner light as he looked towards me and grinned, showing the 100 needle-sharp teeth behind that supertuating saw of a mouth. My mother looked up at him, trying to grab the gun from my father's stiff hands, but the faceless man didn't flinch. He ran forwards, his sleek, bloody body as fast as a greyhound's. He opened his mouth wide and bit at my mother's face. I saw the teeth bite into her skin, and he began to shake his head like a dog, ripping and shredding. Her face became a mask of gore, and I screamed in the car, nearly throwing up. But something inside told me I needed to move. I wasn't a stupid kid after all. I was going to die here next to some woods in the middle of nowhere. I ran out of the back seat and jumped into the driver's seat. I'd never driven a car, but it was, after all, an automatic. It didn't take much intelligence to put it in drive and hit the gas pedal. Of course, I didn't really know how to drive, and I nearly hit a tree. I skidded, turning the wheel, and with 2 bumps, I accidentally ran over my mother and father. The faceless man shrieked with laughter as I drove off down the road, crying and screaming in the car. I abandoned it a few hours later in the city. My father had brought a massive envelope of cash with him in the center console, and I counted it with awe. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars. I went on the run soon after, moving across the country and living on the money I found. It was 4 years later when I went to a carnival bored and decided to have my future read. I hadn't seen the faceless man in years, and I figured I'd lost him. If only that were true. The old woman pulled out a tarot deck and began flipping them over one by one. "Ah," she said in a voice that seemed to deepen. "I see. Here is the man with 3 staves, and here is the wheel, and here is the one-eyed merchant." I screamed, backing up quickly as the flesh began to drip from her face. "And this card, which is blank, is something he carries on his back, which I'm forbidden to see." The last of the skin dripped off. The grinning thing beneath rose from the chair, its sleek, bloody body and black holes of eyes regarding me with glee. "Ah, yes, I am forbidden to see, but I've seen it. And look what it's done to me, Susan. Look what it's done. Your mother and father rot in a shallow grave somewhere, picked clean by animals. And now it's just you and me, Susan. And we're alone. The card is blank, but it doesn't have to be. Come and see what it holds." He rose into the air, his bloody, skeletal feet dangling above the ground. "Come and see." I pulled the pistol I always carried out of its holster and began firing point blank into the demonic face and black heart of that thing. People began to scream all around me at the carnival. I turned to run out of the tent, but a cold hand gripped my shoulder. "Leaving so soon?" The soft voice whispered in my ear, laughing with a sound a drowning man might make. "Ah, but we haven't finished, Susan. Worthy is the lamb, worthy is the—" Suddenly, the hand touched the silver cross my mother had given me as a small child, and it flinched away. I felt the grip loosen, and I ran without looking back. People had taken cover all over the carnival. Many had started to leave, and I saw agitated police and security trying to find out where the gunshots had come from. I immediately mixed into a large crowd and made my way towards the exit. But I constantly looked back, expecting to see a man with a melting face. Perhaps he would act like a police officer and pretend to arrest me before bringing me to some dark forest and starting the skinning process. I keep running now, but I always look over my shoulder, because the faceless man doesn't age, and he doesn't sleep, and he never, ever stops looking.